The sky above Brookdale was still bruised purple from the storm when I sent Olivia to my parents' house. The tornado had torn a crooked path through the town, ripping roofs, shattering windows, and leaving entire streets without power. Our hospital was overflowing, and I had no choice but to stay on shift for the next 2 days. Olivia, shaken but unharmed, needed somewhere safe. My parents' home, just outside the disaster zone, seemed like the obvious answer. But when she arrived, suitcase in hand and still trembling, my mother didn't even open the door fully. Olivia later told me she could see my mother's face through the narrow slit, tight, annoyed, like she had inconvenienced her. "There's no room," Mom said sharply. "Joan and the kids are here." Olivia tried to explain how the sirens had barely stopped wailing, how the hospital needed me, how she had nowhere else to go. But Mom simply repeated herself, this time louder, as if volume could erase obligation. "No, room, go somewhere else." And the door shut. When Olivia called me from the porch, her voice was small and shaky. I could hear the wind still hissing around her. For a moment, I thought she must be exaggerating. Surely my parents wouldn't turn away their own granddaughter in the middle of an emergency. But then, she sent me a photo. The closed door, the drawn curtains, the porch light switched off, as if they were pretending not to be home at all. I felt something cold spread through my chest. Not surprise. Recognition. Because I had stood on that same porch as a teenager, begging for help, only to be told, "Your sister needs us more." Joan, the golden daughter, the one who made mistake after mistake, only to be rescued with a smile. And here she was again, living with them rent-free, taking up space while they shut out my child. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive out there that second. But I was elbow deep in emergency triage, and people were bleeding, crying, searching for missing family members. There was no room for my own pain. Not yet. "Go to Mrs. Kaminsky's," I told Olivia, our elderly neighbor, a kind woman. "I'll fix this." But the truth was, I already knew I wasn't going to fix anything. Not this time. For years, I had funded everything. My parents' utilities, their medication costs, their car repairs. When Joan got laid off for the third time, I helped pay for her kids' school supplies. When she couldn't afford rent, she moved into my parents' house, and I covered their increased grocery bill without complaint. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that they appreciated it, that one day they would treat Olivia the way they treated Joan's children, like they mattered. But their refusal that night shattered any illusion I had left. They didn't just reject Olivia. They made a statement. She wasn't their priority. She never had been. So the next morning, when the power finally came back to my office, I opened my banking app and began cutting every single automatic payment I had set up over the years. Electricity, gone. Water, gone. Property tax assistance, gone. My mother called twice, my father once. I didn't pick up. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks without a word from them. 2 weeks in which Olivia settled back home, helping me sort donated supplies and distribute first aid kits in the hospital lobby. 2 weeks where the silence from my parents felt less like peace and more like a rope tightening, waiting to snap. Then, on a Thursday evening, the snap came. My sister Joan showed up in the middle of my shift, storming into the reception area like she owned it. Her 3 children trailed behind her, carrying plastic bags filled with clothes. "What did you do?" Joan hissed, marching up to the desk. "Mom and Dad's power got shut off. Their fridge is ruined. The kids have been sleeping in the living room because it's freezing." I didn't look up from the chart I was writing. "You're adults," I said calmly. "Figure it out." Joan slammed her hand on the counter. "You can't just abandon your family!" I finally raised my eyes. "My family?" I repeated. "You mean the people who locked my daughter out during a tornado?" The waiting room went silent. A local reporter, covering tornado recovery, happened to be standing nearby. She had been interviewing patients earlier and had taken a seat to send notes back to her editor. And unfortunately for my family, she had excellent hearing. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, approaching with her recorder still in hand. Joan plastered on her victim face immediately. "My sister cut off support to our elderly parents. They're suffering." The reporter raised an eyebrow at me. "Is that true?" I straightened. "Yes. I stopped paying their bills." But what she's leaving out is that they refused to shelter my 16-year-old daughter during an active tornado because they preferred to make room for her and her children instead. A murmur went through the room. Joan's face turned the color of overripe tomatoes. That's not what happened," she sputtered. The reporter wasn't fooled. "Would you like to comment on that refusal?" Joan turned on her heel and fled, her kids scurrying after her. The reporter didn't publish a full story. She said it wasn't her place. But she did mention the situation in a local column about disaster ethics, and my phone buzzed all evening with messages from neighbors who had read it. Some supportive, some shocked, some furious on my behalf. But the best part? Silence from my parents. The next morning, though, my father finally called. His voice was quiet, hesitant, so different from the stern, dismissive tone I grew up with. "We didn't think it was that serious," he said. "Your mother thought Olivia could stay elsewhere." "Dad," I interrupted, "it doesn't matter what you thought. She's your granddaughter. You shut the door on her." He exhaled shakily. "Things have been hard." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "Then this is your chance," I said, "to figure things out on your own, like I've had to do my entire life." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. Just a long pause. And then, goodbye. I ended the call without regret. Life after cutting them off didn't magically become easier. There were moments, quiet, late-night ones, when I questioned myself, when I wondered if I had overreacted, if I should have forgiven them one more time. But then I would look at Olivia, sitting at the kitchen table finishing her homework, humming softly, no longer looking like a child afraid of being unwanted. And I knew I had finally broken the cycle I grew up in. The cycle of giving everything and receiving nothing, of being the daughter who had to earn love while her sister was handed it freely. We didn't need my parents' approval. We didn't need their house, their rules, their cold doorways. We had peace, small, imperfect, but ours. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. For a while, the quiet felt unnatural, like stepping into a house where a fight had just happened, but everyone had gone silent. Olivia seemed lighter, though, less tense, less watchful. It made me realize how much she had carried on her own shoulders, sensing the imbalance in my family long before I admitted it myself. One evening, while we were clearing branches from our backyard, she suddenly said, "Mom, if they didn't want me there, why did you ever want to be around them?" Her voice wasn't sad, it was honest, curious. I put down the rake and leaned on it. Because when you grow up believing love is something you earn, you spend your whole adult life trying to earn it, even when you shouldn't. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. He wasn't angry. She wasn't resentful. She just understood. And maybe that was what hurt the most, knowing she had learned that dynamic simply by watching me. "But we're done with that, right?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "We're done." And it felt true. The next complication came from the community itself. Brookdale was small, the kind of town where gossip lasted longer than thunderstorms, and people began choosing sides almost immediately. Some neighbors stopped by with casseroles and sympathy, whispering things like, "Your parents always spoiled Joan too much," as if it were a revelation. Others avoided eye contact in the supermarket, clearly disapproving of me cutting financial support to the elders. And then there were the ones who approached Olivia at school, offering pity disguised as friendliness. One girl asked her, "Is it true your mom left your grandparents without power? That's kind of cruel." Olivia stood her ground. What's cruel is shutting out a 16-year-old during a tornado. Word spread fast after that. By the end of the week, I heard from the school counselor that half the parent group was discussing our situation in a private chat. I didn't bother reading it. Brookdale could discuss me all they wanted. For the first time, their opinions didn't feel like chains. The real shift happened when I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It wasn't from my parents. It was from the county social services office. They had conducted a welfare check on my parents' home, apparently prompted by multiple anonymous calls claiming elder neglect, none of which came from me. The letter politely informed me that while my parents were physically fine, the inspector had noted unstable household dynamics due to overcrowding and financial dependence on an adult child. It was the closest thing to validation I had ever received from any authority. That evening, I showed it to Olivia. She read it twice, then handed it back with a tiny grin. So basically, the government just said, Grandma and Grandpa need to grow up? I snorted. Something like that. Joan, predictably, was furious. She showed up at my workplace again, accusing me of sending the inspector. You're trying to ruin us, she yelled. No, I replied calmly. You did that yourself. The security guard escorted her out. Despite the drama, life gradually returned to something resembling normal. The hospital shifted from disaster mode back to routine operations. Volunteers from out of state helped repair homes. Schools reopened fully. Streets were cleared. And slowly, I realized I wasn't waking up with that familiar tightness in my chest. The burden I had carried for years of paying for everything, apologizing for existing, making myself small, was finally gone. One Saturday morning, Olivia and I painted her room a shade of soft teal she'd wanted for months. The tornado had cracked one of the upstairs windows, and after it was replaced, she said she wanted a fresh start. As we worked, she said, "It feels like we're building something new. Just us." "We are," I told her, "and it's stronger than anything we left behind." She smiled, paint on her cheek. A real smile. One that wasn't forced to impress anyone or appease anyone. For the first time, our home felt whole. Of course, the peace couldn't last forever. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the hospital, I received a text from an unknown number. It was short. "We need to talk." Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hopeful. I just felt tired. I didn't respond immediately. I waited until Olivia was home from school, made us tea, and then told her. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. She looked thoughtful. "Do you want to talk to her?" That was the question, wasn't it? Want. Not obligation, not guilt, not fear. I realized, sitting across from my daughter, that I didn't want to talk to my mother. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She made her choice, I said quietly. Now I'm making mine. Olivia nodded. Then don't answer. So I didn't. 2 days later, my mother didn't text again. She showed up at the hospital. Unlike Joan, she didn't storm in or yell. She waited quietly in the lobby, sitting with her purse in her lap, like a woman waiting for a bus. A nurse approached me. "There's someone asking for you." The moment I saw my mother, my throat tightened, not from love, not from longing, but from memory. Years of being dismissed. Years of being second place. Years of enduring the way she lit up only when Joan walked into the room. She stood when she saw me. "We need to talk," she repeated. I didn't sit. "Say what you need to say." Her hands trembled. We didn't understand how serious the storm was. We thought Olivia would manage. She did, I replied. Without you. Her eyes flickered with something. Hurt, guilt, or simply disappointment that her apology wasn't being accepted instantly. "I'm your mother," she said softly, as if that alone excused everything. I shook my head. Being my mother never meant being my parent. Her eyes filled with tears. But I didn't step forward to comfort her. It wasn't my job anymore. My mother tried again. "We want things to go back to normal." There it was. Normal. A small word with a heavy chain attached. Normal meant me paying their bills. Normal meant me rescuing Joan. Normal meant Olivia being treated like a guest instead of family. Normal meant swallowing my hurt so they didn't have to acknowledge it. No, I said simply. Normal doesn't work for us. Her tears stopped abruptly, as if she hadn't expected defiance. So that's it? You're abandoning us? I exhaled slowly. No, I'm letting you stand on your own. That's something you should have learned a long time ago. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she sat back down, purse clutched tightly, and whispered, You've changed. I finally learned to value myself, I relied, and I walked away. Afterward, I expected guilt to hit me like a wave, but it never came. Instead, I felt a quiet clarity, a sense of alignment I hadn't known I was missing. That evening, Olivia and I took a walk around the neighborhood. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp soil, remnants of the storm still lingering. Houses were half repaired, roofs patched, windows replaced. People waved as we passed, some with gratitude, some with curiosity. As we rounded the corner, Olivia slipped her hand into mine, a gesture she hadn't done in years. I'm proud of you, she said softly. I blinked, caught off guard. Why? Because you're finally choosing us, she answered. And yourself. And just like that, everything felt right. In the days that followed, the quiet in our home began to feel less like absence and more like space. Open, breathable, ours. Olivia adjusted quickly, slipping into a rhythm that felt startlingly peaceful for a town still healing from a natural disaster. One evening after dinner, we sat on the porch steps with mugs of hot cocoa. The yard was still littered with stubborn branches the cleanup crews hadn't gotten to yet, but the sky was clear, a soft indigo stretching endlessly overhead. Do you think they'll try again? Olivia asked, brushing her hair behind her ear. My parents? I clarified. She nodded. I took a slow sip. Yes, eventually people always try to return to their comfort patterns. But what about you? She pressed. A small smile tugged at my lips. I'm not the same person I was a month ago. And I'm not letting them turn me back into her. Olivia leaned her head on my shoulder. Good. Not much was said after that, but it didn't need to be. For the first time, my daughter wasn't watching me to see how she should feel. She wasn't bracing for disappointment. She wasn't shrinking herself to avoid being a burden. She was simply present, safe, home. A week later, the tornado relief efforts reached a turning point. Volunteers from neighboring states set up mobile restoration units, and the hospital finally had enough staff to rotate breaks again. Life in Brookdale wasn't normal, but it was moving, slowly, stubbornly, towards something like stability. That Tuesday afternoon, I was sorting medical supplies when I heard my name being whispered near the nurse's station. 2 volunteers stood talking, one clutching a clipboard, the other sipping from a dented thermos. She's the doctor whose parents wouldn't take in her kid, one whispered. Yeah, but honestly? Good for her for cutting them off, the other replied. Some people only learn when the money stops flowing. They didn't know I was in earshot. I didn't interrupt. I just exhaled softly. For once, being the subject of local gossip didn't sting. People were going to talk no matter what. Let them. Their opinions weren't my responsibility anymore. That afternoon, I treated a patient with a sprained ankle who worked at the local power company. While bandaging him, he said casually, Your dad called our office 3 times last week, asking for emergency reconnection. Didn't sound happy. I shrugged. He'll manage. The man chuckled. Trust me, ma'am, he will. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to rush to my father's rescue. The next shift brought a different surprise. I returned home to find a small cardboard box on our front porch. No address, no stamp. Someone had left it by hand. Olivia was already peering through the flaps when I walked up. What is it? I asked. She showed me the contents. A photo album. Old, worn, wrapped in a faded ribbon. My mother's handwriting on the cover read, "For Olivia, from Grandma." My stomach tightened. Inside were photographs from my childhood, most of which I hadn't seen in years. School plays, birthdays, summer camping trips. But as we flipped through the pages, a pattern appeared almost immediately. Photo after photo of Joan. Joan blowing out candles, Joan receiving awards, Joan sitting on Dad's shoulders. I was in some pictures, but always on the periphery, half-cropped, one step behind, one seat farther away. Olivia frowned. "Mom, why are you barely in these?" I forced a breath. That's just how it was. She studied my face. This album wasn't for me. It was a message. Yes, a reminder, a guilt package, a silent plea, remember the good times, come back, fix things. I closed the album gently. "We're not keeping it." Olivia didn't argue. She placed it back in the box, taped it shut, and handed it to me. "Letting go means letting all of it go," she said. Her words hit deeper than she knew. That night, I dropped the box off at a donation center, and somewhere inside me, a final thread quietly snapped free. The next morning, the quiet of our home was interrupted not by shouts or arguments, but by the steady hum of determination. Olivia and I had agreed. It was time to face the aftermath publicly, to remove the lingering power Joan and my parents still held over our lives. We arrived at the small town square, where a few neighbors had gathered for a charity event, and there Joan had positioned herself dramatically in front of the fountain, gesturing wildly with her arms as her children clung nervously to her sides. Her story was exaggerated, her voice strident, painting me as the villain who had left her family in literal and metaphorical darkness. I stepped forward, shoulders back, holding Olivia's hand lightly. "I think it's time everyone heard the truth," I said clearly, loud enough for the small crowd to turn toward us. Murmurs began to ripple through the onlookers. Joan spun toward me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You! What are you doing here?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm here to set the record straight. My parents refused to shelter my 16-year-old daughter during a tornado because they preferred to make room for Joan and her children instead. That's the truth." The crowd fell silent. Some faces softened in empathy, others gawked in shock. Joan's face twisted, a mixture of fury and humiliation. The small reporter from the local column appeared at the edge of the crowd, already recording the scene. Joan stammered. "That's not... You're lying!" I shook my head. "No. It's reality, and I have lived with the consequences of their favoritism my entire life. I will not pass that cycle on to Olivia. She will not be overlooked. She will not be punished for being who she is." A neighbor whispered, "She's finally standing up for herself." The reporter stepped forward, capturing every word. I realized then that the story wasn't just about revenge. It was about validation. About reclaiming power, about making injustice visible. Joan's children began to fidget, sensing the tension. My mother and father arrived quietly behind her, hesitant, eyes flicking from Joan to me, unsure whether to intervene. I didn't give them the opportunity. My words cut through the crowd like a sharpened blade. "I've given everything to this family for decades. Financial support, emotional energy, forgiveness. And yet, when my child needed shelter, you refused her. That ends today." Some people in the crowd nodded. Others murmured in approval. The reporter clicked her pen and nodded in recognition of the impact. My parents opened their mouths, likely to justify their choices, but I raised a hand. "No, save your explanations. Your actions speak for themselves. Silence is fine." For the first time in years, I felt the crushing weight lift from my shoulders. The power dynamic that had dominated my life had shifted. The anger, the disappointment, the long-standing favoritism, it no longer had a hold over me. Joan's children looked up at their mother, sensing the tension and finally seeing the truth she had hidden from them. My heart ached for them, but it also steadied me. They would learn from this moment that injustice isn't invisible, and that courage matters. The reporter approached me quietly. "Do you want to make a statement?" I shook my head, smiling faintly. "No, I think the truth speaks for itself." And indeed, it did. In the weeks that followed, life at home stabilized. Olivia thrived, no longer haunted by the fear of rejection from people who should have loved her unconditionally. Our little routines, homework, dinner, walks in the yard, felt sacred. They were ours, untouched by the past, and by choice, we carried forward only what was good and necessary. The town began to view my parents differently. Some neighbors expressed sympathy for the ordeal they'd caused. Others quietly admired my resolve. Joan withdrew, embarrassed and publicly shamed, finally confronted by her own actions and the consequences that couldn't be undone. I had expected lingering resentment from my parents, but after several failed attempts at reconciliation, I realized their approval was no longer necessary. The emotional chain that had bound me for decades had finally been severed. Olivia and I often sat together on the porch in the evenings, the horizon painted with the colors of dusk. We didn't talk about the past unless we chose to. Instead, we spoke of plans, dreams, and laughter. Ordinary moments, extraordinary because they were ours. By the time winter approached, the town had healed from the tornado. Streets were repaired, homes rebuilt, and lives slowly returned to routine. And in our home, a profound sense of liberation had taken root. I no longer checked my phone anxiously for calls from my parents or Joan. I no longer calculated whether my financial support had made a difference. The past had been accounted for, and the present was ours to shape. Olivia leaned against me one evening, tracing the patterns in the wooden railing. "Mom, I think this is really our home now. Not just a place to live, but ours." I hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. "Yes, sweetheart." Ours. And at that moment, I understood the peace I had been seeking for decades wasn't about approval or money or recognition. It was about standing firm, protecting those I loved, and refusing to be diminished again. We had survived the storm, both literal and metaphorical, and we had emerged stronger, untethered, and finally free. Years later, I would reflect on that stormy period and realize how pivotal it had been. It wasn't just a tornado that tested us. It was the culmination of years of favoritism, neglect, and unspoken pain. I had learned that boundaries were not cruelty, they were survival. That standing up for myself and Olivia was not betrayal, it was preservation. And that liberation often comes not through forgiveness, but through self-respect and the courage to claim one's own life. Occasionally, news from my family would reach me, my parents adjusting to life without my support, Joan still struggling to understand accountability. But those events no longer controlled me. They were echoes, distant reminders of a life I had finally left behind. Olivia thrived, carrying with her the lesson that her worth was never conditional, and that love, when deserved, is unwavering. And I knew that, together, we had built something impervious to favoritism, injustice, and past scars. We had built our own world, and it was ours forever.